Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 20 of Quattroporte, the review series for the sports saloons and super saloons of Gran Turismo 6. And of course in this series we don't just feature the absolute top of the line saloons such as the obvious choices of M5, E55, C63, Charger, etc. We also feature the more obscure models which are more in the sports saloon category rather than full-on super saloons. And in that category, this vehicle is actually a pretty good choice. It's the Vauxhall or Opel Vectra 3.2 V6. Now from what I've seen on Gran Turismo, even before Gran Turismo became truly online, as far back as Gran Turismo 4 say, this car was featured. But I've never heard of people liking this car or using this car on the game. Now I'm sure there are some people who really love the Vectra on the game, but I've just never seen or heard of anyone using this car. It's severely underappreciated, but kind of understandable because it's a very easily forgotten car. The visuals don't really stand out. It's the kind of car which, depending of course on what country you live in, you just see every day. And it's just not the obvious choice as far as saloon cars go. There are far more eye-catching and obvious options which come to mind first from companies like Mercedes, Audi, BMW, Lexus, etc. So is this car actually worth taking your attention away from the more obvious choices and spending your money on? Well, what does it have to offer for the money? It's a front-wheel drive car. It's got a 3.2 litre V6 engine, which is pretty decent. The fact that it's front-wheel drive means, of course, that you can't put a huge amount of power and torque down without wheel spinning, and there is a little bit of wheel spin with this car off the line and when exiting corners, but it's far from being the worst of front-wheel drive cars in that regard, and it's actually got a pretty decent spec. It's not going to break any records all round, but it is surprisingly strong. It produces 421 horsepower and just over 380 pound-feet of torque, and it also only weighs a fraction over 1,200 kilos, which is surprisingly lightweight for a relatively big car. And this is no track day special, this is a decent-sized saloon with a pretty large engine, so the fact that you can make it that light is a pretty good thing to bear in mind. Thanks to that relatively low weight, it puts out just under 350 horsepower per tonne, which is okay. That's the kind of power to weight you'd expect from a pretty decent hot hatch, so that's a pretty good sign. And possibly the most surprising thing of all about this car is the PP. It's pretty high, 510. Now that may not initially sound high, but that's not that far off some of the far more obvious choices. And in some cases, that's actually better than some of the other sports saloons that are on offer in the game. So that looks like a pretty decent deal all round, something of a sleeper car. Not a 700 or 800 horsepower dragster, of course, but a sleeper car nonetheless, a car which people just don't use. For the most part, I get the impression don't even think about using, and it just doesn't look that interesting. I'm not saying it's a bad looking car, it just doesn't look like a race winning machine. It just looks like a car. It's built to do a job. Now as far as price, it's pretty good. It's reasonably expensive compared to some of the other lower end sports saloons, but it's still not that expensive overall. It's a 36 grand car. So there certainly are cheaper options, but there are most certainly more expensive options as well. So the price is okay, I would say. Not amazing, but certainly not bad either. It's not breaking the bank. Overall though, what is it like to drive, and more importantly, is it a competitive car? Well, to drive it's actually very good. The front-wheel drive chassis, as I mentioned earlier, does mean that you can only push it so far without creating wheel spin, but the wheel spin is pretty manageable in this car. Just make sure that you don't give it any camber at all, and the rest will pretty much take care of itself. It has very good handling, I would say, for a car of its size, and considering that it's not really a performance model, it does handle itself very, very well, which does show off the innate potential that the Vectra has. And the Vectra in its previous incarnations, of course, was a racing machine, and this one has been used as such as well, even in series up to the DTM. So it certainly has potential for racing, but what about in this street form? Well, I would say it is competitive, but within a certain range. As I mentioned at the outset of the video, there are two main classes of saloon on the game. You've got sports saloons and super saloons. This is not a super saloon, that's fairly obvious. It's not designed to take on the most powerful models like the Charger and the E55, and it's never going to. It's just not capable of that. But for the lower class of sports saloons, including vehicles like the Mazda 6, the Vectra and the like, it's actually a pretty good one to go for. So if you're in a lobby that's more restrictive in terms of power and PP, this is a choice which you may want to bear in mind for the sports saloon category. So that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.